Welcome, everyone. Really glad you're here. Give us just another minute or so people finish joining and we'll get started. Okay, so let's go. Welcome to today's webinar, the STOP Framework, Master MRO Without Slowing Operations. My name is Pedro Lopez. I'm the marketing manager here at ProcureDesk, and today I'm joined by Sachin, our CEO and founder, who's going to walk you through the full framework. Just a quick housekeeping before we hand it over. So this session is being recorded, and I'll send you the replay link to everyone who's registered. And if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat and we'll get at them at the end of the session. And yes, we're having a Q&A, so don't hold back. Okay, now, so why we're talking about MRO spend today? So because it's one of the spend categories that almost every finance and ops leader I talk to says the same thing about. We know it's a problem, but we don't know how to fix it without creating more friction. And that's exactly what Sachin is going to address today. Not a theory, but a practical 4-step framework you can start applying immediately. So Sachin, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Pedro, and welcome everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. So thanks for taking the time. We have around 30 minutes together, so I'll try to make the best use of your time. So let's jump right into it. So what we're going to cover in today's session is, first of all, why MRO spend is hard to control. Like, what are the challenges that we see across our customer base? Where the leakage actually happens, right? So when you look at spend control, where are the problem areas? We'll then talk about the STOP framework, right? The 4 steps and how you kind of go about implementing it. Now, again, this is not just theory. What I'm going to walk you through is actionable steps that you can take today without implementing any new process, new system, and so on. So we'll kind of walk you through, very actionable steps in the framework. And finally, we'll talk about what the control actually looks like. Like, if you follow through these steps or the framework, what exactly would it look like? And then we'll follow up with the Q&A. Now, before we get started, a brief overview of ProcureDesk. So we are a spend management company where we kind of manage entire procure to pay process for growing companies. In growth companies, we work with different companies across verticals like manufacturing, logistics, property management, biotech, and so on, you name it. But this specific of today focus is more on the MRO spend, which are maintenance, repair, and operations, which you would see more across manufacturing, right? So a typical process that we automate for our customers is all the way from a requisition to paying the vendors. So whatever comes in between of that, right, in terms of generating a purchase request, routing it for approvals, purchase orders, goods receipt, or invoice and payment. So whether you pay using credit cards, whether ACH, checks, it's all in one single platform. Now, a little brief overview about me. Why you should listen to me. Again, I'm founder and CEO of ProcureDesk, and I have around 2+ decades of experience around procurement and supply chain. Right, so more in, I would say, I started my career as a I was a vendor in the technology space, helping Fortune 1000 companies automate their procurement and AP processes. But then I kind of moved to a practitioner side and managed around $1 billion in spend, where I managed the entire process from all the way procurement, supply chain, and AP. So when we started Procuredesk, was kind of one simple mission is to help CFO and controllers get better spend visibility so that they can take better decisions when it comes to capital allocation, right? Now, I would love to connect with all of you. So, this is the link here. So, we'll send it along with the slides. Feel free to click here and connect on LinkedIn, so we can continue the discussion there. So, let's jump into the content here. So, starting with MRO spend, right? So, why MRO spend is uniquely hard to control. So MRO, depending upon your scenarios, right? For MRO, let's say you're a manufacturing company, so anything that is required to run the plant, whether it is plant, supplies for repairs or running operations and so on. So typically, this kind of spend is high volume, right? So it's not your $100,000 purchase or $1 million purchase that goes through the regular scrutiny and so on. It basically is low dollar, high volume spend. So the first challenge which we see here is it bypassed the procurement process entirely. Most people we work with don't have a process for indirect spend or MRO spend in this case. So people are buying either through directly going to a vendor portal. Let's say I need to buy some, I don't know, grease or bearing or filters. I could buy it from Amazon. I could buy it from Granger. I could buy it from McMaster, whatever the case might be, right? So they might directly go to a vendor portal, or they're just physically going to a store, picking up what they need and just swiping the card, or maybe texting a supplier, right? So there's no defined process for the spend here. Number two, which we see is it's mostly, since there's no defined process, we see a lot of spend happening on credit cards. So, and the challenge obviously with that is you do not know how much you have spent till the time you receive the credit card statement. So, in a typical problem, right? You see the credit card statement, say, geez, we spent so much. Who spent on this? What was this spend about? And then you're chasing people for receipts so you can understand what did they spend and where did it go, right? So that's challenge number two. Number three is even if you have a process, it generally slips through the approval thresholds. So, what do I mean by that? Typically, companies have thresholds for below this dollar amount, we don't need a purchase request or approval. So, if you have, let's say, a $500 purchase limit and somebody purchased I don't know, it's a pair of gloves, which is $100, or some sort of like ball bearing grease, whatever the case might be, it stays under that threshold limit, so people don't put in requests, right? So it just kind of goes unnoticed. Now, this is not a problem if you have 10 people buying, but when you have multiple location, multiple plans, and you have 100 of people purchasing, this becomes a volume game and it starts adding up from a spend standpoint. And the fourth problem is by the time the GL, it hits your GL, right? You're coding the invoices or credit card receipts and so on, it's too late because the money is already spent and you are now just doing a basic, I would say, reconciliation and putting the history in the system for bookkeeping purpose, but you don't have the opportunity to control the spend, right? So those are the four unique problems we see with MRO spend. So let's go into now where exactly the leakage happens, right? So, what are the areas where we typically see this in day to day operations? So, there are three possible areas where you would see your MRO spend leakage, right? So, number one is at the request, number two is during the approval process, and number three at the vendor level. So, let's talk about each one of them, what it means, right? So, at the request level is if companies do not have a process to receive the request, or if somebody wants to buy something, like is there a requisition process for that? And if you don't have it, then people are just keep buying, right? Or you might have a process for only large purchase like 100,000 and above, then nobody's even putting a request in, so the spend just keeps on happening. You just react to it. You don't have visibility into it. The second is that the approval level, where we see thresholds too high. So your approval limits are set so high that you really don't, there's those transactions which are small in dollar but high in volume, don't hit your approval threshold, which means either A, it's not getting approved, or B, even if it's getting approved, it's getting approved at a self approval or maybe a manager and so on. And the final step here is where we see leakages at the vendor level. The typical challenge with MRO is you are buying a lot of items from different vendors. Now, if you're purchasing the same set of, let's say, gloves from, let's say, Amazon versus Granger, over a period of time, you have bifurcation of spend. So, since the spend is not managed, what lands up happening is you have same set of items purchased from different set of vendors, and there's no preferred list. So people can buy from wherever they want to buy. So even if you wanted to put some, I don't know, approvals on Amazon purchase, there might be people who are buying from Granger. So there's no set list of preferred vendors from where people can buy, right? So those are the three possible areas to watch for. So now, having said all that, in terms of the key challenges and the different zones from where the spend leakage happens, let's look at the framework to stop that. So the framework is, as the acronym is STOP, right? So S is see the spend, T is tighten the gate, O is order the right way, and P is prove and predict. So we're going to walk through now each one of the steps here and kind of give you actionable, I would say, instructions that you can implement today in your process to manage your MRO. So we'll start with S, see the spend. So, by seeing the spend means having complete visibility into your overall spending in terms of what people are buying before it hits your credit card or you have a invoice showing up, right? So, visibility into your committed spend as compared to just knowing, yeah, we spend so much with the vendor. That does not help. So, typical problems here is your current reality might be you have GL statements, right? That shows where the spend was coded, but you don't know what that was for, right? So, did you buy this to repair a machine? Did you buy this for to put it in the inventory or not, right? It just says maintenance supplies, for example. The second thing is with credit cards. So, if most of the spending is on credit cards, then you're basically waiting for 30 days, right, for the statement to arrive. That is when you come to know where you have spent the money, right? The third problem here is if you do not have a requisition process, your request lives in text messages, not in emails and or maybe emails and hallway conversations, right? And the fourth step here is, finance is always reacting at month end, right? Those are problems you see. So if you're seeing any of those problems, you have a spend visibility problem, right? Now, a quick way to figure this out is where you are is let's do a quick self-assessment. So on the right-hand side, these are the four statements. I'm going to read through one by one. If you are doing this today, assign a score of 1 with a total score of 4, possible out of 4, right? So let's get going. So the first one is I can see all purchase requests before an order is placed. So before you spend the money, you have visibility in terms of where it would be spent. So that is number one. Number two is you're checking the budget at the time of requisition. So when you create a request, there is a process for you to check the budget and see how much money is actually in the budget before the purchase happens. That's number two. Number three is every purchase is tagged to a department or an asset for which you're purchasing. So is it for general supplies or you're buying it for a specific asset so that you can basically later track and say how much we spend on maintenance or services for a specific machine or a specific asset that you might have. And number four is finance has visibility all the time into committed spend. So this exactly what going to show up at the end of the month rather than having surprises, right? So I'll pause for a minute and give you the opportunity to kind of rank yourself on these four areas. All right. So let's see. So if you kind of score 1 out of 4, right? So you have one of these going, but 3 not. then that is I would say, a high risk area where there's a lot more opportunity for you to kind of improve on. If you are checking, 2 out of 4, I would say you have some basic processes in place, but there's definitely room for improvement in terms of elevating those processes. If you are 3 out of 4, you have processes that are working, but not working in all the areas. So you might want to look at some of the areas which we're going to talk about today to fine tune the process. And 4 out of 4, you're probably doing a great job and you don't need to be on this call, right? So most of the, I would say, people on the call today are probably, 1 out of 3, 2 out of 3, or 3 out of 3. And then there's definitely an opportunity to, go 4 out of 4. So this is the starting point, right? Seeing the spend to understand how much you understand from a visibility standpoint and how much advanced visibility you have. So once you have that ranking done, we move to the next step, which is to tighten the gate and make sure you get that visibility. This is the step that you implement today to kind of get that visibility from a spend standpoint. So what are the mistakes that the companies make at this level? Number one is you have approvals, but you have approval on everything, right? So, for example, whether you want to buy a pencil for $1 or whether you want to buy a I don't know, $1,000 laptop, everything goes through an approval process. And the challenge with that is you see people trying to find like workaround around the system. It's like, oh, it's too slow, it takes too long process to kind of get something approved, so we're just going to buy and ask for forgiveness later. Happens a lot, right? So that's kind of problem number one. Number two is you probably have approvals or self-approval process, but your threshold is set up too high. So for example, anything less than $500 do not need an approval, which is fine. But what most people do is they treat it as, if it is less than $500, I do not need an acquisition. So you have no way to know what people are spending because your process is set that way. And the third mistake, which we see often, is you have a slow approval routing process. For example, everything needs to be approved by a plant manager. Now, if you ask a plant manager to approve your request, they're probably busy, fighting fires, right, in the plant versus sitting on the desk approving requisitions. So it also comes down to is who's approving those requests and so on. So what actually works, right? So number one is you can set up tiered thresholds. So don't set up thresholds in a way that everything needs to go for approval. You could just say, here's the limit for self-approval, and here's the limit where we need approval, right? So for example, step 2 would be set a threshold where it needs to go to a direct manager. So not everything needs to go to procurement for buying, right? So if procurement has already done their job in terms of negotiating pricing for preferred vendors, then really what you need here is a process or a system that can route the request to the vendor once it is reviewed and approved, right? So that's kind of a process change you can look at. But the third most important thing is you want to have a process for emergency purchase. If something breaks in the middle of the night and somebody needs to go to a store to pick something up, right, or place an order, the last thing you want to do is wait for somebody to approve it before it can move to the next step. So have a process for emergency. So where somebody is, could be as simple as this, right? You check a box and say, this is emergency purchase. You still are following the process, but you're saying this is emergency. And if that is the case, system can route it to either some other person or automatically approve it, right? Because you called it as an emergency purchase. So what can you do today to tighten the gate? So first is define the 3 tiers. What can be auto approved, what needs manager approval, and what needs procurement review. So you define that process, right? Second is set up the threshold for self approval. So let's say, for example, if your threshold is at $500 today, where it needs approval, you could probably bring it down to maybe 50% and start with 250. You can always loosen it up later if you face any sort of resistance from your stakeholders, but it's always hard to kind of tighten it afterwards, right? So go with like maybe 50% of what your limits are. If you don't have the limits, follow step 1, first define those limits and go from there. And third is add a process for emergency, where they can put a reason code or something like that, where say it's an emergency purchase. Here is why, and that maybe either route the process to somebody else or bypass the whole process. Right. So this comes down to setting up the right approval chain. Right. So that's T, tighten the gate. Now let's look at third step, which is O, with order the right way. Now the problem with MRO is, since you're buying hundreds of parts or thousands of parts in some cases, if there is no standard way of buying, people will put generic descriptions on what they're looking to purchase. For example, stuff for the machine. Now, what the hell the stuff is depends upon who put that in, right? So, if AP is looking at an invoice from a vendor and the requisition says stuff for the machine, it's very hard for them to match. What it does is it creates friction in the process and increase the cycle time for processing invoices. So typically, we'll see you probably buying the same part from 6 different vendors. As a result of that, since the volume is distributed across different vendors, you don't get pricing discount, right? And then descriptions are all over the place. So it's hard to standardize in terms of what people are actually buying. So you might be buying the same part, but you can't consolidate your spend because the descriptions are so off, right? And then that means AP is spending a lot of time matching the invoices and trying to figure out what people actually buy. So, if you're dealing with any of those symptoms, here is the strategy to solve for in the next 30 days. So, number one is you want to look at your overall spend and consolidate the vendors. So, look at, let's say, the top 5 vendors, right? Or where you have more than 5 purchases. Look for the last 90 days. It's a good starting point. If you've never done this exercise, I will go as long as maybe like 12 months back, but even 90 days is good enough. So what that gives you is the baseline of what are you purchasing and from whom are you purchasing. Once you have that data, you can pull that from if you have a procurement system or an ERP system and so on. The next step is negotiating the volume discounts. Now, if you have a buyer, they can do this job, or if you are, let's say, a controller, you can just send event, details, ask the vendors for the best price, and say, hey, we are looking to consolidate the vendors across these categories. What is the best price you can offer? Once you have that, the next step is you want to make sure is people can buy from your negotiated rate. There's no point negotiating an awesome contract and price if people don't use that. And the reason for that is, you probably have a catalog or people don't know from where to buy. Now, there are different ways of solving for that, combined with maybe a system like ProcureDesk where you can automate the purchasing process. You can either build a catalog where people can simply click on it and buy, or it could be a list of punch outs through which you're connecting, or punch out vendors where they can go to the vendor website and buy. Either way, you're trying to simplify the experience but making sure they can buy from the preferred contracts, right? So the benefit of doing this is, one, you have consistency. Two, you're saving maybe 5 to 8% is what we have typically seen as a benchmark for cost saving. So if you spend $100,000 every month on it, you're saving 5 to 8,000 every month through better price discounts, right? And the final step is the prove and predict, right? So when you think about overall spend visibility, there are different, I would say, areas to focus on, right? So typically, when when CFOs are looking at capital allocation decisions to understand like where are we going to put capital on, right? A common thing they would ask is which machine is consuming the most maintenance budget, right? And if you don't tie the expenses or MRO spend to the asset for which the spend is happening, it's very hard to answer those questions. You're always assuming or maybe allocating fixed costs to all the different machines, right? And maybe there's one machine which is consuming 90% of the budget. Maybe it's time to replace that machine and get a new asset, right? Facility wise, which facilities went over budget, like which facilities are under the budget, which are over, or forecasting what the next month or next quarter MRO spend would look like. Or if somebody asks why are we spending so much on MRO, can we defend it? Can we tell the story behind it, right? So to get to this level where you can answer all these questions without digging through your spreadsheets or calling 10 people, the easiest way to do this from day one is, number one, when you're buying something, tag it to the right department. So your purchase request process, make sure this happens. Number two, tag it to an asset or machine. Number three, tag it to a category. Like, what are we buying? Lubricant, fastener, electrical, whatever it is. Tag it to a budget so you know which budget is spent. And then that way you can report actual versus budget, right? So that is fourth step of the process. So just to kind of reiterate, right? So going back to our framework here. So see the spend, tighten the gate through better approval process, order the right way by automating the cataloging process, and then prove and predict to make sure that you have spend tied to the right buckets for analysis. So if you do all that, right, what does it look like? So if you look at from, we call it going from review and regret to control and predict. So when you don't have, or you have a reactive mode, right, you have credit card spend all over, you can't forecast your spend, you have no idea which machine or department is spending the most, right? And forecasting kind of becomes a guesswork at that time during month end. And ops kind of work around the process, right? If you do this right, this is what you would see in your operation, right? Number one is you have visibility upfront, right? You know what your committed spend is. You have approvals happening in real time, right? Every dollar that you spend is tied to a source, machine or category or asset, and so on. And we see as a result of all that, month end process becomes faster, right? Typically, if you are into 10 to 12 days, you'll come down to like 5 or 6. And of course, you have more room for opportunity, but that's kind of, I would say, the easy benchmark that you can use. And you would see ops becoming faster, right? So ops moves faster. They are able to buy what they want to buy with a better process. So here's just to summarize now the takeaways, right, from this. If you don't remember anything, remember this. These are the three things you can implement this week, right? Number one is pull the last 3 months of MRO spend and understand how many vendors you have, how many free text POs you have. Is there an opportunity for reducing the spend or tightening the process, right? In terms of, I would, if I'm starting today, I would look at maybe how many purchases are under 500, how many are between 500 and 10,000, and things like that, right? So that's number one. Understand your spend. Number two is understand your current thresholds, right? So if you realize there is a lot of volume which is less than 500, maybe you want to adjust your approval thresholds and have like a requisition process set up, right? And number three is I would score across all four steps to see where we are in each one of them, so you can define an actionable roadmap for you to follow and improve your process and get better visibility in your MRO spend. So with that, I know we are 2 minutes early. We can open it up for Q&A. Again, if you want to connect on LinkedIn, just click on this link. And, we do post on YouTube some of the similar videos, where Procure Desk is the channel name. So you can search for Procure Desk and find us there. If you would like to see exactly how Procure Desk can help with your MRO spend, then click this link here to book a demo with one of our product experts. With that, I will hand it over back to Pedro for any questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Sachin. It's been a great session so far. All right, everyone. So we've got some questions coming in. Let's get into them. Okay, Sachin. So the first one is from Austin, and he asks, our technicians hate approval processes. How do we get buy-in?
Yep. That's a great question. And that's the reality of many ops teams, right? Technicians don't want to spend their time putting requisitions in. And I would say the answer to that is you need to look at how you can make the procurement process frictionless. So, for example, a few things you can do rather than having them type a large form on, hey, this is my requisition process, have something which is pre-filled based on their profile. All they have to do is click few buttons and they can add what they're looking to purchase. Two would be, making the approval process faster. So if they're not able to do approvals on time because people are traveling or whatever, a mobile app would help, right? So they can just approve from mobile app. So I would say if technician hits, following a procurement process, look at the process and see where is the most friction and try to go after that.
Awesome. And now we have another one from John. He says, how do you handle true emergency purchases where there's no time for a PO? That's a good one.
Yep. No, that's another great question. An emergency purchase happens in plants, right? So, and I kind of touched upon this in the presentation, is what you want to look at is there are a couple of ways to solve for it, right? Number one is you could just have some inventory, right? So rather than, buying everything just in time. Maybe the most critical parts can sit in the inventory. I know nobody, finance team would hate it to have inventory on the books, but that's kind of easy way to handle those emergencies. And second would be have a process which handles that, right? So if there's an emergency, people can go and buy, and they can later come and put the PO in the system, right? So maybe not a proactive measure, but or the third way would be just make it simple, right? Give them a requisition that can be accessed on a mobile app. So while they're on their way to the shop, they can just put in the request and what they're looking to buy. So those are a couple of things you can do to speed up the process.
Awesome. Thank you, Sachin. We're going to wrap there, but I want to say thank you to everyone who joined today live, especially those who sent in questions. It was a great conversation. Sachin, do you have any final thoughts before we close out?
No, thank you for joining. I would say connect with me on LinkedIn or on YouTube, and let's continue the conversation there.
Perfect. So for everyone watching live, you'll receive the recording and a copy of the STOP framework in your inbox within 24 hours, so you can start applying these steps with your team right away. I hope today we gave you a clear path to mastering your MRO without slowing down actually your operations. Thanks everyone. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.
Thank you all.